Chapter 17 of The Lamplighter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Lamplighter by Maria Susanna Cummins. Chapter 17. And thou must sail upon the sea, a long, eventful voyage. The wise may suffer wreck, the foolish must. O then, be early wise. Warn. Emily sat alone in her room. Mr. Graham had gone to a meeting of bank directors. Mrs. Ellis was stoning raisins in the dining room. Willie still detained Gertrude in the little library below stairs, and Emily, with the moonlight now streaming across the chamber, which was none the less dark to her on that account, was indulging in a long train of meditation. Her head rested on her hand. Her face, usually so placid, was sad and melancholy in its expression, and her whole appearance and attitude denoted despondency and grief. As thought pressed upon thought, and past sorrows arose in quick succession, her head gradually sunk upon the cushions of the couch where she sat, and tears slowly trickled through her fingers. Suddenly a hand was laid softly upon hers. She gave a quick start, as she always did when surprised, for her unusual preoccupation of mind had made Gertrude's approaching step unheard. "Is anything the matter, Miss Emily?" said Gertrude. "Do you like best to be alone, or may I stay?" The sympathetic tone, the delicacy of the child's question, touched Emily. She drew her towards her, saying as she did so, "Oh yes, stay with me." Then observing, as she passed an arm round the little girl, that she trembled and seemed violently agitated, she added, "But what is the matter with you, Gertie? What makes you tremble and sob so?" At this, Gertrude broke forth with, "Oh, Miss Emily, I thought you were crying when I came in, and I hoped you would let me come and cry with you, for I am so miserable I can't do anything else." Calmed herself by the more vehement agitation of the child, Emily endeavoured to discover the cause of this evidently new and severe affliction. It proved to be this. Willie had been to tell her that he was going away, going out of the country, as Gertrude expressed it, to the very other end of the world, to India. Mr. Clinton was interested in a mercantile house at Calcutta, and had offered William the most favourable terms to go abroad as clerk to the establishment. The prospect thus afforded was far better than he could hope for by remaining at home. The salary was, at the very first, sufficient to defray all his own expenses, and provide for the wants of those who were now becoming every year more and more dependent upon him. The chance, too, of future advancement was great, and though the young man's affectionate heart clung fondly to home and friends, there was no hesitation in his mind as to the course which both duty and interest prompted. He agreed to the proposal, and whatever his own struggles were at the thought of 5, or perhaps 10 years' banishment, he kept them manfully to himself, and talked cheerfully about it to his mother and grandfather. "Miss Emily," said Gertrude, when she had acquainted her with the news, and become again somewhat calm, "how can I bear to have Willie go away? How can I live without Willie? He is so kind and loves me so much. He was always better than any brother, and since Uncle True died, he has done everything in the world for me. I believe I could not have borne Uncle True's death if it had not been for Willie. And now how can I let him go away?" "It is hard, Gertrude," said Emily, kindly, "but it is no doubt for his advantage. You must try and think of that." "I know it," replied Gertrude. "I suppose it is. But, Miss Emily, you do not know how I love Willie. We were so much together, and there were only us two, and we thought everything of each other. He was so much older than I, and always took such good care of me. Oh, I don't think you have any idea what friends we are." Gertrude had unconsciously touched a chord that vibrated through Emily's whole frame. Her voice trembled as she answered, "I, Gertrude? Not know, my child? I know better than you imagine how dear he must be to you. I, too, had—" Then checking herself, she paused abruptly, and there was a few moments' silence, during which Emily got up, walked hastily to the window, pressed her aching head against the frosty glass, and then, returning to Gertrude, said in a voice which had recovered its usual calmness, "Oh, Gertrude, in the grief that oppresses you now, you little realize how much you have to be thankful for. Think, my dear, what a blessing it is that Willie will be where you can often hear from him, and where he can have constant news of his friends." "Yes," replied Gertie. "He says he shall write to his mother and me very often." "Then, too," said Emily, "you ought to rejoice at the good opinion Mr. Clinton must have of Willie, the perfect confidence he must feel in his uprightness to place in him so much trust. I think that is very flattering." "So it is," said Gertrude. "I did not think of that." "And you have lived so happily together," continued Emily, "and will part in such perfect peace." "Oh, Gertrude, Gertrude, such a parting as that should not make you sad. There are so much worse things in the world. Be patient, my dear child, do your duty, and perhaps there will some day be a happy meeting, that will quite repay you for all you suffer in the separation." Emily's voice trembled as she uttered the last few words. Gertrude's eyes were fixed upon her friend with a very puzzled expression. "Miss Emily," said she, "I begin to think everybody has trouble." "Certainly, Gertrude. Can you doubt it?" "I did not use to think so. I knew I had, but I thought other folks were more fortunate. I fancied that rich people were all happy. And though you are blind, and that is a dreadful thing, I supposed you were used to it. And you always looked so pleasant and quiet, I took it for granted nothing ever vexed you now. And then Willie! I believed once that nothing could make him look sad, he was always so gay. But when he hadn't any place, I saw him really cry. And then when Uncle True died, and now again to-night, when he was telling me about going away, he could hardly speak, he felt so badly. And so, Miss Emily, since I see that you and Willie have troubles, and that tears will come, though you try to keep them back, I think the world is full of trials, and that everybody gets a share. It is the lot of humanity, Gertrude, and we must not expect it to be otherwise." "Then who can be happy, Miss Emily?" "Those only, my child, who have learned submission; those who, in the severest afflictions, see the hand of a loving Father, and, obedient to his will, kiss the chastening rod." "It is very hard, Miss Emily." "It is hard, my child, and therefore few in this world can rightly be called happy. But if, even in the midst of our distress, we can look to God in faith and love, we may, when the world is dark around, experience a peace that is a foretaste of heaven." And Emily was right. Who that is striving after the Christian life has not experienced moments when, amid unusual discouragements and disappointments, the heart, turning in love and trust to its great source, experiences emotions of ecstatic joy and hope that never come to the prosperous and the world called happy? He who has had such dreams of eternal peace can form some conception of the rest which remaineth for the people of God, when, with an undivided affection and a faith undimmed by a single doubt, the soul reposes in the bosom of its Creator. Gertrude had often found in time and the soothing influences of religious faith some alleviation to her trials, but never, until this night, did she feel a spirit not of earth, coming forth from the very chaos of sorrow into which she was plunged, and enkindling within her the flame of a higher and nobler sensation than she ever yet had cherished. When she left Emily that night, it was with a serenity which is strength. And if the spirit of Uncle True, looking down upon her through the bright star which she so loved, sighed to see the tears which glittered in her eyes, it was reassured by the smile of a heaven-lit light that played over her features, and when she sunk to slumber stamped them with the seal of peace. Willie's departure was sudden, and Mrs. Sullivan had only a week in which to make those arrangements which a mother's thoughtfulness deems necessary. Her hands were therefore full of work, and Gertie, whom Emily at once relinquished for the short time previous to the vessel's sailing, was of great assistance to her. Willie was very busy daytimes, but was always with them in the evening. On one occasion he returned home about dusk, and his mother and grandfather both being out, and Gertrude having just put aside her sewing, he said to her, "Come, Gertie, if you are not afraid of taking cold, come and sit on the doorstep with me, as we used to in old times. There will be no more such warm days as this, and we may never have another chance to sit there and watch the moon rise above the old house at the corner." "Oh, Willie," said Gertrude, "do not speak of our never being together in this old place again. I cannot bear the thought. There is not a house in Boston I could ever love as I do this." "Nor I," replied Willie. "But there is not one chance in 100, if I should be gone for 5 years, that there would not be a block of brick stores in this spot when I come to look for it. I wish I did not think so, for I shall have many a longing after the old home." "But what will become of your mother and grandfather if this house is torn down?" "It is not easy to tell, Gertie, what will become of any of us by that time. But if there is any necessity for their moving, I hope I shall be able to provide a better house than this for them." "You won't be here, Willie." "I know it, but I shall be always hearing from you, and we can talk about it by letters, and arrange everything. The idea of any such changes, after all," added he, "is what troubles me most in going away. I think they would miss me and need me so much. Gertrude, you will take care of them, won't you?" "I?" said Gertrude, in amazement. "Such a child as I? What can I do?" "If I am gone 5 or 10 years, Gertie, you will not be a child all that time, and a woman is often a better dependence than a man, especially such a good, brave woman as you will be. I have not forgotten the beautiful care you took of Uncle True, and whenever I imagine grandfather or mother old and helpless, I always think of you, and hope you will be near them, for I know, if you are, you will be a greater help than I could be. So I leave them in your care, Gertie, though you are only a child yet." "Thank you, Willie," said Gertrude, "for believing I shall do everything I can for them. I certainly will as long as I live. But, Willie, they may be strong and well all the time you are gone, and I, although I am so young, may be sick and die. Nobody knows." "That is true enough," said Willie, sadly, "and I may die myself. But it will not do to think of that. It seems to me I never should have courage to go, if I didn't hope to find you all well and happy when I come home. You must write to me every month, for it will be a much greater task to mother, and I'm sure she will want you to do nearly all the writing. And whether my letters come directed to her or you, it will be all the same, you know. And Gertie, you must not forget me, darling. You must love me just as much when I am gone, won't you?" "Forget you, Willie? I shall be always thinking of you, and loving you the same as ever. What else shall I have to do? But you will be off in a strange country, where everything will be different, and you will not think half as much of me, I know." "If you believe that, Gertrude, it is because you do not know. You will have friends all around you, and I shall be alone in a foreign land. But every day of my life my heart will be with you and my mother, and I shall live here a great deal more than there." They were now interrupted by Mr. Cooper's return, nor did they afterwards renew the conversation on the above topics. But the morning Willie left them, when Mrs. Sullivan was leaning over a neatly packed trunk in the next room, trying to hide her tears, and Mr. Cooper's head was bowed lower than usual, while the light had gone out in the neglected pipe, which he still held in his hand, Willie whispered to Gertie, who was standing on a small chest of books, in order to force down the lid for him to lock it: "Gertie, dear, for my sake take good care of our mother and grandfather. They are yours almost as much as mine." On Willie's thus leaving home for the first time, to struggle and strive among men, Mr. Cooper, who could not yet believe that the boy would be successful in the war with fortune, gave him many a caution against indulging hopes which never would be realized, and reminding him again and again that he knew nothing of the world. Mrs. Sullivan bestowed on her son but little parting counsel. Trusting to the lessons he had been learning from his childhood, she compressed her parental advice into few words, saying: "Love and fear God, Willie, and do not disappoint your mother." We pause not to dwell upon the last night the youth spent at home, his mother's last evening prayer, her last morning benediction, the last breakfast they all took together, Gertrude among the rest, or the final farewell embrace. And Willie went to sea, and the pious, loving, hopeful woman, who for 18 years had cherished her boy with tenderness and pride, maintained now her wonted spirit of self-sacrifice, and gave him up without a murmur. None knew how she struggled with her aching heart, or whence came the power that sustained her. No one had given the little widow credit for such strength of mind, and the neighbors wondered much to see how quietly she went about her duties the day before her son sailed, and how, when he had gone, she still kept on with her work, and wore the same look of patient humility that ever characterized her. At the present moment, when emigration offers rare hopes and inducements, there is scarcely to be found in New England a village so insignificant, or so secluded, that there is not there some mother's heart bleeding at the perhaps lifelong separation from a darling son. Among the wanderers we hope, aye, we believe, that there is many a one who is actuated, not by the love of gold, the love of change, the love of adventure, but by the love he bears his mother, the earnest longing of his heart to save her from a life of toil and poverty. Blessings and prosperity to him who goes forth with such a motive. And if he fail, he has not lived in vain. For though stricken by disease or violence at the very threshold of his labors, he dies in attestation of the truth that there are sons worthy of a mother's love, a love which is the highest, the holiest, the purest type of God on earth. And now, in truth, commenced Gertrude's residence at Mr. Graham's, hitherto in various ways interrupted. She at once commenced attending school, and until the spring labored diligently at her studies. Her life was varied by few incidents, for Emily never entertained much company, and in the winter scarcely any at all, and Gertrude formed no intimate acquaintances among her companions. With Emily she passed many happy hours. They took walks, read books, and talked much with each other. And Miss Graham found that in Gertrude's observing eyes, and her feeling and glowing descriptions of everything that came within their gaze, she was herself renewing her acquaintance with the outside world. In errands of charity and mercy, Gertrude was either her attendant or her messenger. And all the dependents of the family, from the cook to the little boy who called at the door for the fragments of broken bread, agreed in loving and praising for the child, who, though neither beautiful nor elegantly dressed, had a fairy lightness of step, a grace of movement, and a dignity of bearing, which impressed them all with the conviction that she was no beggar in spirit, whatever might be her birth or fortune. And all were in the invariable habit of addressing her as Miss Gertrude. Mrs. Ellis's prejudices against her were still strong, but as Gertrude was always civil, and Emily prudently kept them much apart, no unhappy result had yet ensued. Mr. Graham, seeing her sad and pensive, did not at first take much notice of her, but having on several occasions found his newspaper carefully dried, and his spectacles miraculously restored, after a vain search on his part, he began to think her a smart girl, and when, a few weeks after, he took up the last number of the Working Farmer, and saw, to his surprise, that the leaves were cut and carefully stitched together, he, supposing that she had done it for her own benefit, pronounced her decidedly an intelligent girl. She went often to see Mrs. Sullivan, and as the spring advanced they began to look for news of Willie. No tidings had come, however, when the season arrived for the Grahams to remove into the country for the summer. A letter, written by Gertrude to Willie soon after they were established there, will give some idea of her situation and mode of life. After dwelling at some length upon the disappointment of not having yet heard from him, and giving an account of the last visit she had made his mother before leaving the city, she went on to say, "But you made me promise, Willie, to write about myself, and said you should wish to hear everything that occurred at Mr. Graham's which concerned me in any way. So if my letter is more tedious than usual, it is your own fault, for I have much to tell of our removal to D., and of the way in which we live here, so different from our life in Boston. I think I hear you say, when you have read so far, 'Oh dear, now Gertie is going to give me a description of Mr. Graham's country house.' But you need not be afraid. I have not forgotten how, the last time I undertook to do so, you placed your hand over my mouth to stop me, and assured me you knew the place as well as if you had lived there all your life, for I had described it to you as often as once a week ever since I was 8 years old. I made you beg my pardon for being so uncivil, but I believe I talked enough about my first visit here to excuse you for being quite tired of the subject. Now, however, quite to my disappointment, everything looks smaller and less beautiful than it seemed to me then. And though I do not mean to describe it to you again, I must just tell you that the entry and the piazzas are much narrower than I expected, the rooms lower, and the garden and summer houses not nearly so large. Miss Emily asked me a day or two ago how I liked the place, and if it looked as it used to. I told her the truth, and she was not at all displeased, but laughed at my old recollections of the house and grounds, and said it was always so with the things we had seen when we were little children. I need not tell you that Miss Emily is kind and good to me as ever, for nobody who knows her as you do would suppose she could ever be anything but the best and loveliest person in the world. I can never do half enough, Willie, to repay her for all her goodness to me, and yet she is so pleased with little gifts and so grateful for trifling attentions, that it seems as if everybody might do something to make her happy. I found a few violets in the grass yesterday, and when I brought them to her she kissed and thanked me as if they had been so many diamonds. And little Ben Gately, who picked a hatful of dandelion blossoms, without a single stem, and then rang at the front door bell and asked for Miss Gam, so as to give them to her himself, got a sweet smile for his trouble, and a "Thank you, Benny," that he will not soon forget. Wasn't it pleasant in Miss Emily, Willie? Mr. Graham has given me a garden, and I mean to have plenty of flowers for her by and by. That is, if Mrs. Ellis doesn't interfere, but I expect she will, for she does in almost everything. Willie, Mrs. Ellis is my trial, my great trial. She is just the kind of person I cannot endure. I believe there are some people that other people can't like, and she is just the sort I can't. I would not tell anybody else so, because it would not be right. And I do not know as it is right to mention it at all, but I always tell you everything. Miss Emily talks to me about her, and says I must learn to love her. And when I do, I shall be an angel. There, I know you will think that it is some of Gertie's old temper, and perhaps it is, but you don't know how she tries me. It is in little things that I cannot tell very easily, and I would not plague you with them if I could do so. So I won't write about her any more. I will try to be perfect, and love her dearly. You will think that now, while I am not going to school, I shall hardly know what to do with my time. But I have plenty to do. The first week after we came here, however, I found the mornings very dull. You know I am always an early riser, but as it does not agree with Miss Emily to keep early hours, I never see her until 8 o'clock, full 2 hours after I am up and dressed. When we were in Boston, I always spent that time studying, but this spring Miss Emily, who noticed that I was growing fast, and heard Mr. Arnold observe how pale I looked, fancied it would not do for me to spend so much time at my books, and so, when we came to D, she planned my study hours, which are very few, and arranged that they should take place after breakfast and in her own room. She also advised me, if I could, to sleep later in the morning, but I could not, and was up at my usual time, wandering around the garden. One day I was quite surprised to find Mr. Graham at work, for it was not like his winter habits. But he is a queer man. He asked me to come and help him plant onion seeds, and I rather think I did it pretty well, for after that he let me help him plant a number of things, and label little sticks to put down by the side of them. At last, to my joy, he offered to give me a piece of ground for a garden, where I might raise flowers. He does not care for flowers, which seems so strange. He only raises vegetables and trees. And so I am to have a garden. But I am making a very long story, Willie, and have not time to say 1,000 other things that I want to. Oh, if I could see you, I could tell you in an hour more than I can write in a week. In 5 minutes I expect to hear Miss Emily's bell, and then she will send for me to come and read to her. I long to hear from you, dear Willie, and pray to God, morning and evening, to keep you in safety, and soon send tidings of you to your loving Gertie. End of chapter 17.